Hello everyone! I recently finished Dragon Age the Veilguard and wanted to gather all my thoughts into one review. Please bear with me, this is the first review I have ever done and I have no idea what I'm doing. This may be all over the place, but I want to share my 2 cents and hear what you all thought of the game too. If you would like to see any part of my playthrough, I do have it posted on my channel. I've organized my thoughts into categories and have added timestamps for them, but before we get into those, I want to give a sort of general review for those who may want to avoid spoilers. So here's the thing about the Veilguard. Does it deserve the criticism it has received? Yes. Does it deserve to be called garbage or trash? Not necessarily. It wasn't a great game, especially when you think about it in the context of Dragon Age. It is not a Dragon Age game, and we'll go into further detail and discussion about why later on. But when you delude yourself and disassociate it from Dragon Age and just think of it as simply a game, it was entertaining enough. Yes, the woke aspects of the game felt forced, but that wasn't even the Veilguard's biggest fault. The writing was inconsistent, and at times, pretty bad. The characters had potential, but that potential was never developed into anything more. It feels like this game was rushed, which, judging by its development journey, it more than likely was. That said, the environment details were beautifully done. The combat, again, was entertaining enough. I'm not super picky about combat, so others might have a stronger opinion about it, but I didn't mind it. The tone of the game is a lot lighter than previous Dragon Age games. It feels very Disney Pixar-esque. It was definitely made to appeal to a younger audience, and was disappointing, to say the least. It's not a game that I'm dying to play again. If I do, it will probably be a decade or two from now, and it's also a game I won't miss playing. Rating the game has been tough for me. I think I've landed on 4.5 out of 10. 4.5 out of 10, maybe. This next part, or at least some sections, is where we get into spoiler territory, so if you want to avoid that, this is your warning. Again, I'm not super picky about combat, so this category may hold more weight for some people. The combat is okay. I thought it was entertaining at times. People compared it to God of War, Hogwarts Legacy, and Assassin's Creed, more so like Odyssey, I think. And I agree with that comparison. I enjoyed each of those games, so I don't have anything against the action combat style. It's just not Dragon Age. The combat isn't any better or worse than previous games, it's just different. I missed the slower pace, I missed being able to fully control your companions, and the companions being able to die in combat in previous games versus not in this game makes a big difference. I think it's more impactful when they're more active because they matter more. But all in all, the combat did not take away from the experience. As for the class, I can't speak for the other classes, but I liked the mage. I especially enjoyed how you can switch between weapons. This next category may not be important to everyone, but I'm including it here because music is one of the first things I notice in anything. Music is very important to me, and it's actually one of the reasons I started playing Dragon Age in the first place. The Dragon Age soundtracks are incredible and beautifully done. They are so impactful. There is a huge difference, for example, hearing the Atonement ending theme with the Lost Elf theme integrated into it. The Lost Elf theme feels so much more connected to the story and the characters. When I first heard the theme for the Veilguard, I was underwhelmed. It was okay, but that's about it. And I felt like people were drooling over it and defending it just because Hans Zimmer's name is on it. And don't get me wrong, Hans Zimmer is a brilliant composer, one of the best film composers of our time, easily. But the theme was simply mediocre. And I feel that way about the entire soundtrack. I got so bored with it. There's nothing about it that feels like dark fantasy or high fantasy. There's a special quality that's missing. It feels more superhero action film. Not always, though. There was a time it reminded me of Final Fantasy, so that just tells me the tracks are inconsistent. The music in previous Dragon Age games is a living, breathing thing. You can feel it in every step you take. In the Veilguard, it's just there, in the background. Okay, here we go. This part of the game is significant enough that we should talk about it, especially given how this game has been received because of it. There's absolutely no problem with including any kind of gender identity topic in this game. The inclusion of it is not the issue. The issue is the execution. To start, the term non-binary is way too modern. When comparing it to other queer characters in past games, Dorian never says the word gay. He says he prefers the company of men. And Krem wasn't called trans, he was simply a man. Plus, in a conversation with Iron Bull, he says that Krem fits the Kunari concept of a kun Athlock, which translates to born as one gender but living like another. Speaking of Dorian and Krem, they were written and integrated into Inquisition very well. Krem being a woman who is now a man, and Dorian being gay was not the focus of their character and personality. There were small conversations about it every once in a while, but they were also real and dynamic. Not to mention, dialogue about Krem was optional. Give people the choice to interact with it or not. You should also be able to disagree with any dialogue. There was a comment I read somewhere that said something along the lines of, Dorian's story allows the player to explore your own thoughts and feelings and empathize with Dorian and who he is as a person. But Tasha's story tells you how to feel, and tells you that you're wrong if you don't understand or agree. Now, another issue here doesn't even have to do with Tosh being non-binary. It's how Tosh is represented as a whole. During the non-binary reveal scene, Shathan doesn't say anything that would realistically set off Tosh. Shathan actually wants to understand, and asks for clarification, and even brings up the fact that there's a non-binary equivalent in the Kunari culture. And then Tosh freaks out. Not to mention, Tosh acts like an entitled teenager throughout the game and is actually pretty rude to other people and companions. So why would you create a non-binary character who throws tantrums and has a bad attitude, constantly insults other people and their cultures, and acts like a child? This is a solid case of digging your own grave here. And again, Tasha's entire character is about their identity crisis. Way to represent the community. They could have written Tasha's gender dysphoria into a complex storyline about growing up among the Talvashoth and struggling with identity. But instead, they made it petty and threw it in there for the sake of having it there. And it's annoying this way because it's in your face instead of intelligently written in to create an interesting, complex character. The other games had no problem with showing the reality of how women are treated in that era and how much racism there is towards, elves, etc. If they showed how non-binary people would have realistically been treated, that would have made for a very compelling and emotional side story. There are several videos from the LGBT plus community sharing their perspectives about this. Something that really stood out to me was something that Enclave Emily said. Writers should be talking about gender dysphoria seriously instead of using it as a political tool. The link to this video is down below in the description. When you tell a story, you have to be careful about how you tell it. You want your message to get across, but not in a preachy way. People shouldn't be forced to agree with something just because you think it's right. Everyone is going to interact with a story differently, and in a series like Dragon Age, that's kind of the point. Racism and misogyny have been an integral part of the Dragon Age series. They add depth to a story and are very common elements of the dark fantasy genre. If we can incorporate political or sensitive topics like gender identity, why not other real-world topics like racism and misogyny? Which, by the way, will always exist, so there's nothing wrong with using these topics and themes to create and drive complex characters and stories. In the Veilguard, there's absolutely none of that. The lack of racism especially was very noticeable, given that I always play as an elf. Elves, historically, have been treated like crap. What happened to that? When Solus talks about tearing down the veil, there is no mention of the slavery or horror that elves had to endure. Belara constantly talks about how the elves are essentially at fault and made poor choices, but the whole intent of Solus here is to liberate the elves because of what they went through and how they were treated. The end of Inquisition even told us the elves sensed Solus's presence and were gathering to support him, but that didn't happen. I missed being called knife ears or judged and doubted because I'm an elf. It felt raw and real. Instead, every race in this game was walking and talking amongst each other as if there had ever only been equality and kindness. Even slavery in Tevinter no longer exists. This was our first time getting to interact directly with Tevinter, and we didn't even get the real thing. Slavery had been mentioned throughout the series, and all of a sudden, somehow, everyone is at peace? This game seems to ignore everything about people being treated differently or poorly. I made a note saying, I think it was an Inquisition, there was a joke about dwarves all looking the same. That was hilarious, and also true. Why is it a problem if the characters in each race have similar features? That's true for real life, too. Each ethnicity has distinct or common qualities that sets them apart from others. It's okay if we acknowledge that. Which sort of is a good segue into the next section, which is all about the characters, companions, and designs. So let's start with the designs. None of them look like they're all part of the same race. And the Kunari? Don't even get me started. The Kunari look way too human. They're supposed to be tough, harsh, and complex. Here, they are so humanized, it looks unnatural. Them, alongside everyone else, look flat and airbrushed and Disney-fied. Everyone looks like a cartoon. I can tolerate it, it's just unfortunate. Especially given the character designs in previous games, we know they can do so much better. Even the demons were less intimidating and frightening. I do have one positive thing to say though. The fluidity of movement, the textures and fabrics, these things were great. The details in the environments were very nice to look at as well. And here we'll kind of merge design and characters by talking about the character creator. I understand the different points of views when it comes to the character creator, including the option for surgery scars. I think they could have easily just included that style of scar under body scars without specifically calling it top surgery scars. But either way, I didn't use it. Doesn't bother me. I don't care. What bothers me is the limit they put on other aspects of the character. You all likely know what I'm talking about. Breasts and glutes. I don't understand how you can be so inclusive one way and not the other. You know, you don't need a curvy body to look feminine, but I, alongside many others, found it really difficult to make a feminine, delicate rook. You have over 100 hairstyles, but limit the body type and facial features? It's just weird. I ended up liking my rook, and she was cute, for sure, but I definitely felt limited in what I could do. Which is funny, because I found this character creator to be a bit overwhelming. There's something nice about having a simple character creator. And the Inquisitor could not be recreated. Hawk was able to be perfectly designed in Inquisition exactly how she looked in Dragon Age 2, but there was no way to create my Inquisitor in the Veilguard, and that was really sad. Now, the characters and companions. Something that also really bothered me was including significant characters from previous games, but not the significant choices that would have come with them. Dorian was my Inquisitor's best friend, and we hardly get to see them interact. And why was Isabella thrown in there? And without mention of anything that happened in Dragon Age 2. She betrayed and left Hawk, and yet, if I remember correctly, she had the balls to say that she learned a lot about family during her time in Kirkwall. Anyway, Dorian and Isabella, Morrigan, and even the Inquisitor should have been utilized so much more. Instead, they were thrown in for what? There are also other characters from the series that would have made a lot of sense to include. I've seen people mention Meryl, and I stand with them that Meryl should have been included in the Veil Jumpers. Alistair and our Warden from Origins too, if both of them were still alive. Where was the hero of Ferelden, who said she was trying to find a solution and end to the calling? So, I mentioned before that the characters had potential, but that potential was never developed. That includes the companions and the antagonists. I just said this about demons, but even the antagonists weren't frightening or intimidating. Nobody feels like an integral part of your party either. Not to mention, there is something so off about character movements and facial expressions. They seem so stiff. And the acting seems lifeless. But maybe that's just the script. The actors can only do so much. But I really think it's also the body language. Like, they only have one or two movements or poses that they stay in every time they're on screen. I did end up watching some of the romance scenes. Honestly, I couldn't get through the entirety of them. The romances in Dragon Age Origins and Inquisition made me laugh and blush. They're comforting and romantic and steamy, which is funny because apparently they said the romances in the Veilguard would be steamy. But the Veilguard romances are so dry and forced, like a bad fanfiction or a not safe for work Hallmark movie. Anyway, in general, Nev was lifeless, Lucanus and Davrin were okay, but boring. Tosh was infuriating and had ridiculous double standards. Balara was annoying. Harding and Emmerich were okay, I guess. Harding more so, and I was actually emotional after what happened with her, but, I think she was the best out of all of them. But mostly everyone felt very one-dimensional. And you know what? There are people like this out there, so it's fine to have characters like these in the story, but then we should be able to decide how we treat them and respond to them. We should have the freedom to choose aggressive dialogue or whether we want to interact with this character more or keep them in the party or not. The companions were just so poorly written. Tosh could have been so cool and interesting. And Lucanus? Spite should have been way more intense and spiteful, acting on that spite. Demons are powerful. Considering Anders, there is no way Spite would have just become friendly and lived happily ever after with Lucanus. And this all brings us to the next topic. This is the Veilguard's biggest fault: the writing. A lot of people in the Dragon Age community mention a quote from David Gator, who essentially expressed that in relation to the writer's strike. Writing is an undervalued discipline, and everyone thinks they can write. But that's simply not true. Not everyone can write, and there's a big difference between good and bad writing. And that BioWare, which built its success on good stories and characters and valued its writers, has turned into a company that quietly resents its writers, and that everyone in charge was asking, how do we have less writing? I honestly wish this was the last installment in the series, and that Solus succeeded. The pacing of this game was all over the place, and there was no rhyme or reason to anything. The Veilguard started halfway through the story. We don't get any foundation. I would have loved to get more background on Rook's relationship with Varric, how they met, why he chose Rook to be the leader, why Rook even cares about stopping Solus. That would have made more sense. A lot of the dialogue is very modern and doesn't connect with the dark or high fantasy type speech from previous games, which completely ruins the atmosphere. The language feels out of character. The conversations are bland and boring. Lots of repetitive information is said. Companion arguments and conflicts are petty and juvenile. You can't even argue with the companions. Nobody fights me. I gave Balara so much attitude, or tried, to the extent of the attitude the dialogue allowed for, and all she did was smile and say positive things afterward. You cannot make any choices except those that agree and comply. So it's just plain and simple. There is a clear lack of choice in this game, especially when it comes to dialogue. We just want a dialogue option where we can tell Tosh to calm down and grow up, or to say, I don't get it, or you do you, or to tell Balara to shut up or that she talks too much, and if she doesn't like it, she can leave the party. I remember the dialogue option. I wrote it here as chicken with crossed arms. That one, it said, keep trying. Very stern, very blunt. And then, after I chose it, Rook says, don't give up. I want the companions to get angry with me. When I upset Alistair in Origins and he yelled at me, I felt bad. When I made a choice that upset him, it felt wrong. And it made an impact. These characters just agree with everything you say, and you agree with everything they say. Nobody can do wrong. Nobody has any other feelings aside from acceptance. If you take a look at some videos comparing insults in Origins versus the Veilguard, it's so funny, but so sad. Origins allowed you to actually choose what kind of person you want to be. Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition did the same. To have attitude, to be rude, to say something that is actually funny, the humor was witty and clever. The Veilguard is so dry and awkward. I would have really loved the choice to recruit a companion or let them go. I usually recruit and keep all the companions anyway, but just having the choice there helps it feel more realistic and meaningful. I mentioned the music in previous games was a living, breathing thing. The characters need to be the same. Companion betrayals were so shocking and so great in previous games. Zevran, Anders, Iron Bull, what happened to that? Not a lot of decisions had actual consequences. Treviso versus Manrathus was really the only big choice, and then Emmerich becoming a lich, but it really felt like nothing mattered. They made it clear from the beginning that even our choices from previous games didn't matter, and they solidified that and really rubbed it in with the secret ending, which feels like a cop-out. Suddenly, one of the most important elements of the series, a big part of what makes Dragon Age Dragon Age, is taken away. Overall, this game seems to have been made for a very modern audience. It feels very youthful compared to past Dragon Age games. There is no maturity to the Veilguard, most notably in its lazy, one-dimensional writing and characters. Again, it feels very cartoony, very Disney Pixar-esque with its animation and lighthearted tone, constantly pushing the companion quests and reminding us there are side quests to do was annoying and unorganic. With that and the recaps, it felt like I was being treated like a child. And to not be able to lose a companion's loyalty or choose whether to recruit a companion or have them leave, the constant supportive nice guy dialogue, everything is so forced. I liked that it started to have a darker tone in the last couple of hours, but why did we have to wait until the last couple of hours for that to happen? And even after Act 3 showed more promise, the ending was still underwhelming. If you haven't seen it already, The Art of the Veilguard showcases old concepts and what the game could have been. Yes, games always change in various ways from the initial concept, but what we got is nowhere even near what had originally been created. The final product is supposed to improve on the concept, but in this case it's the opposite. I highly recommend either getting the book or checking out videos where you can see the artwork and listen to people explaining the concepts. Just as a little example, my jaw dropped and I got goosebumps knowing that Rook was going to meet the person you left behind in the Fade in Inquisition. There is very little continuity from previous games, and that is something so crucial that left a big, gaping hole in the Veilguard. The conclusion I came to is, even if the woke aspects were not present, even if Tosh was cool, even if the gender identity was tastefully and properly integrated into the game, or not at all, it would still not be great. If you understand that it's not a Dragon Age game and come to terms with that, then it's not a terrible game. But again, it's not great either. And it is a Dragon Age game, or was supposed to be, so take from that what you will. The Veilguard had potential, but potential is now all it will ever be. It's a generic action game. Matt Goldman, senior artist for Origins, described Dragon Age as a dark, evil, and twisted world. That, unfortunately, is no longer true. Let me know what you think, if you agree or disagree, or if I missed anything. I'm sure that I did. What bothered you the most? What did you like the most? What do you imagine will be the future of Dragon Age? Thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to hear from you.